Okay, welcome everybody to the Regional Leadership Committee. Without any further ado, I'm going to invite Hilali to Perkia.
Kia koutou ni haku mihi ki koutou. He maumahara ko Kanati Whitiraki me te au ko hatu ki nei wā, haere atu rā ki tātou tokora, a roko o te kaupapa o te rānei. Ki uri tēnā o Karatai mei, ki hapu maha o tākau mei Whakataraki, Maureki, Hokanui, tēnā koe. Whakatakata hau ki te ura, whakatakata hau ki te tonga, ki mā kenekene ki uta, ki mā taratara ki tā, e hi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he hoka, he au hei, te hei, mauri ora.
Thank you. Okay, going through the agenda, thank you. Apologies. I think Richard was saying that Lloyd is an apology for sickness.
Yes,
I'll move
may
that.
pop up online.
Are there any further apologies, Alexa?
Is how she's going?
It may be online. I'm not.
She said we have been unwell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can see who's up there now.
Okay, who's up there? Lloyd's up there. So Lloyd isn't actually an apology then if he's up
No.
there.
I'm happy to put Alexa. I think it's been quite unwell.
Cool, and I'll second that. I'll put the acceptance of that apology. Those for, aye, against, carried. No public forum. Confirmation of the agenda. We'll take the agenda as read and agreed. Declaration of interest. Just remind.
It's just a move and a second for the confirmation.
I'm happy to move.
Okay, I've got a mover. Do I have a seconder for the agenda? Elliot, I'll put that motion, acceptance of the agenda. Those for, aye, against, carried. Okay, remind councillors declaration of interest, presentations, confirmation of the minutes. I wasn't actually here at the last meeting. Elliot, would you be prepared to move the minutes? Thank you. Do we have a seconder for the minutes that they are true and correct?
I don't think.
Kate, I'll put that motion. Those for, aye, against, carried. There are no open actions from resolutions from the committee. Okay.
Alexa's there.
Alexa's here. Welcome, Alexa. Okay, I'd invite Joe, you and your staff to. Yeah, welcome. Cool. So, got one agenda item, and that's the regulatory agreement update for the report prepared by Alexandra, Tammy, Simon, and Steve, endorsed by Joanna Gilroy. Thank you. The purpose of today's meeting is to update the committee on activities of the regulatory group from the 1st of February this year to 30th of April and to approve the compliance audit and performance monitoring schedule for the 24-25 year. The key points to me that have stood out in this report, firstly, consent processing. Consent processing has been down compared to the 305 in the previous year. This decrease is due to less intensive winter grazing consents being applied for. Deemed permits, I think we're on the periphery of significant achievement insofar as 157 applications have been achieved. And the status of the remaining application is 1. Have I read that correct? So no doubt we'll talk about it in due course. On page 10, there's an outline where the comment is made to enhance public inquiry service as well as other projects reported to date. Staff have led and are working on or are finalised, and there's a list of various activities. Well done. RMA consent audits. Formal enforcement action taken in relation to these this year includes 20 abatement notices, 14 infringement notices, and 3 formal warnings. Dairy compliance program. Overall, the compliance is very high with 240 8 farms graded fully compliant, 107 farms graded low risk non-compliance, 17 farms were graded moderately non-compliant, and 7 farms were graded significant non-compliance. Maybe that will be discussed further. Commercial forestry, that's something that has had some discussion. In the 23-24 year to date, OLC received 134 forestry notifications, 68 management plans. Compliance staff have undertaken 50 forestry inspections in the 23-24 year to date. That's an increase of 13 inspections. Overall compliance was high. 30 forestry sites graded fully compliant and 16 forestry sites graded low risk non-compliance. 3 forestry sites were graded moderate non-compliance and 1 site was graded significant non-compliance. In relation to low flow monitoring, it was a busy year. There were 12 monitoring sites triggered. There were 110 water take consent holders triggered. Environmental pollution incidents, approximately 1,200 service requests, which translated to 936 incidents being generated. And overall, investigations and enforcement action in the 23-24 year, OSC issued 89 formal enforcement actions, including 3 prosecutions, 35 infringement notices, 41 abatement notices, and 10 formal warnings. So there's been some work out there. And a final comment on the final page, some discussion will be required. There is the presentation of a compliance audit and performance monitoring schedule for the upcoming 24-25 year, which is part of the recommendations to be considered. So, Joe, what have I missed? What other comments would you like to make?
Thank you for that very comprehensive intro. Only thing I'd like to reflect on is the Harbour Master team. They've been out and about on the water, and we've had a successful laying of coastal monitoring buoys that you may have seen in the media recently. So that's been a joint effort with other organisations, but some great work from the team on that. And Tammy is just going to briefly give us an overview of our compliance monitoring program as it relates to forestry. So that was a request made at a workshop. So we're just going to take the opportunity to give a general overview of that now. So I'll just pass over to Tammy.
That's great. Thank you.
Great. Through the chair, I'm just going to provide a really high level overview of our approach to monitoring forestry here in Otago. We did provide a presentation or a council workshop back in November. So I understand that is available, and it will go in more detail than I will cover here this morning, but could be a good resource to go back to. So forestry in Otago is predominantly under the NES for commercial forestry, and there is a requirement for forestry managers and operators to notify council when they are undertaking certain activities in the forestry cycle. And then once we receive a notification, we then request the management plan that corresponds to that activity. So that can be things like afforestation, harvesting activities. Then we undertake a risk assessment of the management plan to consider what risks there are. So that risk assessment considers a broad range of factors. So it considers the compliance history of the operator, the site, so the topography, proximity to waterways, the erosion susceptibility classification, whether or not river crossings are a part of the activity, when the activity is going to be undertaken, and what season, and other sensitivities such as fish spawning, whether there are water takes or infrastructure downstream. So based on that risk assessment, we then determine whether or not a site visit is appropriate, and if it's deemed low risk, then generally no site visit will be undertaken. Medium, we may, depending on the risks, and that would be a site visit at the end of the work. So once afforestation has been completed or the harvesting has been completed. For high or extreme risk sites, they will have a site visit where we go out and inspect during the activity and then also post the activity being completed again to check that the appropriate controls are in place. We also do maintain our reactive approach too. So if we receive complaints, again, we will assess and undertake a reactive site inspection. So this year to date, we have completed 50 forestry inspections, which is an increase from previous years. And something that has been good with the NES commercial forestry, so previously it was plantation forestry, is the ability for council to recover costs associated with monitoring afforestation activities, which previously we weren't able to do. So happy to take some questions if that's.
Oh, so let's open it up. Yeah, let's specifically talk about forestry. Any forestry questions? Tim.
Thanks, Tammy. I'm just interested in the sort of what happens when somebody goes out on an inspection. What do they do? Who do they sort of work with and all that sort of thing? What's the process?
Yeah, good question. So how it works is we will notify the company that we're coming out to visit the site, and so we're meted by them, and we go through the health and safety aspects of the site, and then depending on what it is, so if it's afforestation, we'll go to the sites where there has been that activity. Similarly, where the harvesting is being occurred, and we have recently to introduce drone technology, which has really supported us in our monitoring because as you may appreciate, these sites can be quite large. So we will target where we go. So if there's a river crossing, we will go and we will walk to the river crossing and see how the activity's been undertaken. If it's at the end of a harvest, we will check how the site has been stabilised. So it's about going around to the areas of the site where we want to check that there have been appropriate controls put in place, and that they are meeting both the management plan and also the NES commercial forestry regulations.
So just in terms of the health and safety, I mean, it's a pretty dangerous site usually. What are the instructions for our people in terms of the health and safety on site? And you mentioned that there was some sort of briefing that takes place, but yeah, can you sort of give us further details on that?
Yeah, so they will do the standard check when they go on site to check the risks. Usually what will happen is that the operator will shut down operations if we are going into an area. Obviously they don't have to shut down the whole block, but where we are, usually what happens is they will shut down machinery, and so to reduce those risks to staff. So all our staff are well trained in how to keep themselves safe. They've got the appropriate PPE and those sorts of things.
Thank you.
And sorry, I forgot to mention too. So once a site visit has been completed, an audit report will be completed and sent back to the operator. If there are concerns we see on site, we will verbally direct them to put in additional controls, and that will be followed up in writing. And if there are any remedial actions, but that will be sent to the operator. And then if there is non-compliance, and we will investigate that and determine what, if any, formal compliance action might be required.
Cool. Okay, we're specifically taking any questions on forestry. I've got Andrew and then Gary. Yeah, Andrew.
Thanks, Tammy. The high risk criteria, is that identified that the staff use? Is that identified in the NESCF, or is it identified in existing council policy?
So it's not identified in the NES as such. There are guidelines, so there are MPI guidelines that we work within, but we have also developed our own criteria for the factors that we will consider for that risk assessment.
And those high risk criteria would include slope, like more than 35 degrees or whatever, and proximity to water bodies and et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, and I think the criteria that is becoming more and more common is compliance history. So we've got a number of operators where the compliance history hasn't been as good, and so we will put a spotlight on those ones, and potentially they are considered higher risk.
So that's a good segue into my next question, because I was going to ask what percentage of applications or notification for forestation and harvesting, what percentage of the applicants would be first timers versus ones who have either been through the process before, or you have some history of their performance, etc.
I don't have that stat, but I would say the majority are operators that we deal with commonly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. During the Land and Water Plan workshop, we had some evidence provided by Brodie O'Loughlin, maybe, and I think maybe she's an enforcement officer or whatever. But it obviously showed some, what would you say, sedimentation risk, probably the best way to put it. Are you able to share with us whether that is that likely, those three scenarios, were they what you would describe as not the norm in terms of the data you currently collect? And I'm basing the question on the data we've received today about essentially 90% being either compliant or low risk. That's really why I've asked the question, if you're wondering.
So are you asking into?
So I suppose those three, I'll reframe the question. Those three examples that were given, is that a fair reflection of the majority of operators in the forestry sector?
No.
Okay.
And it's also really important to note that the monitoring that we do is under the NESCF. So any examples that we've provided relate to that and are specific to complying with that legislation.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool. Gary?
Thanks. So just expanding on some questions a wee bit longer. So when staff are on site with the forestry organisation, they've shut down. Is the inspection done with the owners or without the owners?
It's usually done with the operator. Yes. So we will walk the site with them.
Yeah, I mean, Gary, you referred to owners and Tammy referred to operators.
I suppose the responsibility holders would be the
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for clarification. So it's usually the contractors on site who are actually doing the works. So they are the ones that we are liaising with on site. So it's not necessarily the forestry owner.
and the contractors will be the ones who are liable for any issues anyway.
Yes.
And also often on some of these projects, there's the owner, there's the contractor, and then there's the agent. Often and the contractor might be subordinate to the agent. Yeah.
So just for clarity, we still hold responsibility for the safety of our staff. So it's important, which is why we would not be going wandering around a live forestry site without the people who are operating that site. So that's a very important part of the health and safety planning.
Yep.
So just because we're on someone else's site, it doesn't remove our responsibility for the safety of our staff, which is part of the planning and part of the reason why we would, those forestry inspections are always done, it would be very rare for us to be anywhere near a site that wasn't arranged and organised with those people who are in charge of that site.
Because there could be times when they have specialised equipment to get around those steep, gnarly sites that our equipment may not be suitable for. Yeah. Okay, that's cool. What happens if they say no? What do we do then?
Look, that doesn't actually happen often, so I just want to say that. But if it was to happen, so all of our staff are warranted. That warrant under the RMA provides them with the right to go on site and inspect. So they are all warranted. Given the risks of a forestry site, we would want to manage that appropriately. But I guess in practice, we rarely come up with anyone not permitting us to come on site.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Tammy. Tim, again.
Yeah, just a couple of other questions. I guess the main focus is sediments and waterways. Is that primarily what you're monitoring when there's harvesting taking place?
Yes, sediment and waterways is one of those high risk kind of effects that we are monitoring, but there are other things that we are looking at on site.
Yeah, like slash is very topical at the moment. So what sort of focus do we have on slash?
Yeah, so that's so that would be assessing that they are complying with the management plan provisions and the NES, and that they're not leaving slash in places that they shouldn't, and they're managing it appropriately. Yeah.
Oh, I think we might be done with forestry. Oh, sorry, Kevin.
Just a couple, going back to, it was referred by that it would be the contractor that would be liable, but the owner would still have liability in that he could have possibly instructed the contractor to do something. I'm thinking on afforestation or whatever, so that the owner would have direct liability as well.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah. So just on afforestation, so when is it that ORC gets involved in that as opposed to the TA? So afforestation notifications go to both the district council and the regional council. So the districts will be considering whether or not it's compliant within their framework. We're responsible in terms of the regional aspects of that activity. So it goes to both councils. So so I bring this in mind in light with what's happened up the Livingston area when a block was planted, then burnt down, and then it was found that the TA had never inspected it, and the plantings were right to the roadside. They were through waterways, and it was that was 15 years old, so it had never been. So do we then, if it's notified to both, if both of us know about it, do we now, in light of what has happened historically, if TA's never inspecting it, do we actually ensure that we do inspect, or are we still leaving that to TAs to do?
So it is, we don't step into the responsibility of the district council in terms of monitoring compliance, but we have in the past worked with some of the TAs to do joint site visits.
Right. So we could get a situation where, in fact, we never look at a site that could be all done by the TAs.
Potentially, if like, so we get notified of afforestation, and we get notified, and if we go through our risk assessment and it's not near any waterways, it might not be a site that we prioritise to inspect.
So it doesn't mean we don't look at it. We receive the notification and look at that information. It just means that it may not trigger a physical site visit. So we're absolutely aware of that forestry site being set up, but it may not meet that criteria that triggers a physical visit from the team.
Right. So therefore, we may never know. We may never know if their afforestation has been done correctly until we put a drone over it, or we'll take a satellite image in 5 years' time when the plants are.
And given when you say that, you're probably specifically talking about like distance from the boundary and planting in waterways.
And under all the new rules with firefighting and tracks and all that sort of stuff.
We do. Sorry, Rich. We do have to take the information provided from the foresters on face value and audit that against the regulations and our criteria. So, and we have those appropriate checks and balances in determining if a site visit is required, so that there are absolutely steps in place to do everything we can to ensure that people are meeting their legal requirements.
And I could add to that. So, we have history with these contractors, and so if a contractor that has planted within the setbacks notifies, then that is likely to result in us actually going on site after the afforestation to check that hasn't occurred. But as Joe said, we receive these notifications and management plans in good faith, and I would say in my experience in the time I've been here, there is good practice there, particularly around planting not within setbacks.
But I think the short answer to your question is no.
No.
Any activity across Otago, we never know everything that's going on because we just don't have the resources to do
Yeah,
everything.
yeah.
So the short answer is no, we don't know everything. And yes, there is a possibility that there will be a site that is not planted in accordance with the plan, and we will never know until it might be raised years in the future.
Yeah.
And
Something goes wrong.
that's just part of needing to run risk matrix over what we do and prioritise the resources we've got. And I think a lot of that also comes down to relationships with the parties that are undertaking this work and them understanding what our processes are and getting to a point where they're not prepared to take that risk. And you know, we're building some good relationships in that space, but we will never be in a position across any activity in Otago where we know, you know, we can eliminate that risk altogether. We just wouldn't have the resources or the funding to do that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, so I've got Kate, Andrew, Milani.
Good, good segue into my question, which was raised yesterday, I think, Phil Murray, and the Lake Onslow forestry. Now, that was planted, I think, as plantation forestry, but isn't plantation forestry. I presume large blocks of trees, wherever they may be, anywhere in Otago, if they're not seen as a carbon forest or a plantation forest, do they have to meet any regulations? And will they potentially under the draft land and water plan?
I can't answer that last one, but no, they don't need to meet the regulations of the NES for commercial forestry.
Okay, and so we won't be inspecting them. Yeah, I mean, up in those sites where you get big winds and there may be trees falling over around waterways and things, we've got no role or we can't do anything. I'm not quite sure. I mean, we've got nothing to measure it against at the moment because if it doesn't meet the NES, we don't have anything in our land and water plan or our current water plan.
Doesn't fall under the NES CF.
Yeah.
So, and as far as I'm aware, no, if a tree falling into a waterway on a forestry block isn't something that's covered under our regional plan water.
Even though it may be causing a dam and a sediment issue. Yeah, okay.
Thanks, Kate. Andrew?
Thanks, Brian. Just want to go back to Kevin's question. Can I ask, does the NESCF specify to regional councils and to TAs the various responsibilities they have in relation to rules and regs? And if I use the example of setbacks, TA's responsibilities would be setbacks from neighbouring properties or roads, etc. And our responsibilities are obviously setbacks from waterways. Is that a fair summary? We can't tell a TA what to do, like you've said. However, the responsibilities are clearly outlined in the NESCF for each entity.
Yes, so the NES for commercial forestry outlines exactly which provisions are to be monitored by which council.
Cool. Thank you, Andrew. Milani?
You're talking about triggers and one of them being past non-compliance as a reason that you would flag a particular operator. Just wondering what happens in the instance where it's a completely new operator you have no relationship with, and how do you know what their performance is going to look like? Are they flagged in any way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So yes, if they are a new operator, then it's an unknown in terms of their knowledge or experience or how they undertake the activities. So that would be considered a higher risk and would likely lead to a site investigation or audit.
Thanks.
Cool. Okay. Okay. Lucky last. Third question. Oh, I'm being very
Just one
generous.
last question, and then yeah, Kate sort of stimulated this one around carbon forestry, and I probably should know the answer to this, but I can't remember. So carbon forestry, does that fall under the commercial forestry national policy statement or NES that you're referring to?
Yes, so plantation forestry NS was amended to commercial forestry, so to incorporate carbon forestry.
Right, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Tammy and Joe, in relation to forestry. I'm going to open it up now to any other queries. Okay.
Just the, scrolling there, paragraph 19, you talk about the public inquiries. And just checking on that as a portion of the work, because we've got, I think this is covered 100% in general rate. And so I'm just inquiring really as far as the proportion that we're putting into general as opposed to expecting, especially with the changing playing field for consents. And when I'm thinking about that in long-term planning, the proportion going to consents generated as a department.
So yes, that is covered by general rates. There is a portion and half an hour is provided free, and if we have pre-application activities under our schedule of fees and charges, we have the ability to cost recover for formal pre-application reviews or large meetings, and that is clearly communicated to applicants. So very small portion cost recoverable, but we are all rate funded for that service, which is heavily utilised.
Yeah, so can I just understand, so when they're both 100% covered, I get that, but what sort of proportion is that part of your work? You're saying here it's a significant part. Is it 20% or is it 30% of your work, or?
So it's covered by 2 FTEs within the team. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Elliot, then.
I understand we probably had a few public inquiries around ongoing mining activity around Hawkeswood, but also that there's limitations on what can be said. Just wondering if there is anything you can share around any compliance activity or monitoring around that ongoing activity.
Yes, I can share. So we went out to the site late last year and then identified that there were activities being undertaken without consent. So we issued the company with 3 infringement notices and an abatement notice to cease those activities until a consent was provided. And they have paid those infringement notices, and they have been compliant with that abatement notice.
This has been ago, yes. No.
That's good.
Yes. Thank you. Andrew.
My question relates to the 24-25 audit and performance monitoring schedule. And on figure 9, it looks like there's a sort of steady demand or increase in auditing and inspections, and you essentially said the schedule reflects.
Excuse me, Andrew, what page is that, please?
Oh, it's the last page, 38. Sorry, 36. So my question is, the 24-25 schedule is based on the work or the the amount of work for the previous year, and I just wondered, based on figure 9, the volume seems to be going up. So have you calculated that ongoing increase in the sort of program that you're anticipating for the 24-25? Yeah, that was my question. Are you being a little conservative?
Well, I'd just like to say that the team has really gone above and beyond this year, and it's been really great to see them deliver. And so the targets that we've got here for the next financial year are the same as this financial year. And the reasons we haven't increased is because we are aware of some significant projects coming up in the next financial year, including a change to our regulatory data system, and that will require staff involvement as well as regulatory change and how that is embedded.
You probably wouldn't put it in front of us if you weren't happy with it. Yeah, fair enough.
Cool. One of the second recommendation that we have today is to actually approve the schedule. So I invite any if there's going to be any discussion, invite that now, following Andrew's question on that schedule. Okay, so what other questions should be asked? I mean, it's based on the previous year, as been pointed out, in terms of data and Kate.
I'm happy to ask that question. I'm always excited to know what updates are coming and technology wise that reference was. And yeah, if you want to expand on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, we'll pass to Simon. So this is part of our Iris Next Gen program, which is an update to our database, Acela. So whilst not within this paper, Simon will just give us a brief update on how it will affect our teams.
So Iris Next Gen is a collaboration between 9 councils to build and replace our regulatory database system. So that's our consents and compliance database, which is currently Acela. We're due to begin implementation of that in earnest in January next year. We'll be the first council to do that, and all going well, we'll be live by October. It's a fairly in-depth project for the team. There'll be a lot of time put into it, but yeah, looking forward to moving to something more modern and custom built.
That sounds exciting. Can I understand what the front end of that looks like for Joe Boggs on the street? Because people are interested in seeing data and whether there's that friction between public and private. I appreciate that.
So a part of the answer to that is it's still being built. So I know what it's supposed to look like, but I haven't seen it yet. There will be a much better interaction for customers in terms of their own data. So there'll be a customer portal that they can log consent applications through. They can see the status of their applications as they track through the system, and we should see requests for performance monitoring, so things they have to send us coming through that portal as well. Mm-hmm. Nothing major yet in terms of what people would see about other people's data. So at the moment it's focused on customers having a better experience with their own processes. But that doesn't mean that won't come in the future. One of the benefits of Iris Next Gen is it's 9 councils being able to invest together in improvements in the system. So rather than us going, we want to do this, we have to do it ourselves, all the councils can agree and move in the same direction.
Sounds great. And what improvements will it make for you guys as efficiencies go?
Yeah, so we're hoping it'll have a reasonable effect on the amount of manual work we do. There's lots of things currently, like for example, consent application forms are manually entered into the system. They will be able to be entered online through a form that connects and puts them in automatically. We're looking at automating some of the requests. So at the moment we're sending out mail merges saying to people, please send us these things. Those requests will be automated. Expiry reminders will be automated. So lots of those manual administrative tasks. We'll spend more time getting them set up properly in the system, but then the actual reminders should come out automatically.
Sounds exciting. I'm almost sad that it hasn't happened already, but good on you for getting it to that point. These things were talked about in the 1990s, I think, when Peter started. But thank you.
Any other queries in relation to the monitoring schedule? Compliance audit and performance monitoring schedule?
Happy to move that we accept that schedule.
Okay, well, how about we do that? But thank you. We'll note that. Alan?
Yes. I just wondered a bit of further explanation about that monitoring schedule. Planned performance monitoring grades. What's that mean?
Probably shouldn't actually say grades. It should say inspections. So performance monitoring is something that someone has to send us under their resource consent. It can be anything from a notification before they do work, to water quality samples, to their annual water meter returns. So that's the number of those things that we will grade for compliance within the year.
Yeah, okay. No, that explains that. Thank you. And look, I did have a question probably for the Chief Executive, actually. On pages 17 and 18, where it's talking about the options. I see option 1, paragraph 74, there are no disadvantages with the recommended option, and the alternative, 76, there are no advantages with this option. Mr. Saunders, would you be able to arrange it so all our decisions are this straight?
Sure.
Oh, Okay, we've talked about the schedule. Steve, Harbour Master, from memory in your report there weren't any incidents in the period, but you've been busy doing a few different things. For example, assisting with putting out wave height buoys with the DCC in the port. Is there anything you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, happy to give a quick overview on that. So Port Otago offered up an opportunity to supply some wave monitoring buoys in the region and off the coast. DCC were keen, as part of their coastal project, to place one off of White Island for the Sinclair area. And I grabbed hold of that. Yes, please, I'd love one at their cost. So we essentially placed those a couple of weeks ago under an MOU with the three organisations. One's placed off the heads at the harbour here to help the pilotage team be better informed on wave management on entry for commercial shipping. The other one, as I said, is off White Island to inform the DCC with their coastal planning. And the third one, which is essentially our one, is placed off of Tyree Mouth to help inform members of the public conditions at the bar. Just another piece of information on top of the cameras to give people the information to make better decisions when crossing a bar at Tyree Mouth, following a number of fatalities, obviously. So, yeah, we've placed all of those. The key driver for me was, lovely. Can we please ensure that the data is made publicly available for members of the public? And we've managed to do that. Shared the links with everybody. I'm pleased to say they're still in place 3 weeks down the line. We log on, every day, every other day, just have a look, make sure they're repeating off the data in the right location. We've got some spare ones sitting in the office ready to go, signed off and registered. Should we lose one, I have to go track one down. So a really good project with all three parties. We look forward to seeing how that data sort of sits down the line. Obviously, we need a bit of time to embed. It's been a really good project.
Cool, thank you. Any questions of Steve? Elliot?
Do you have the one Harbour Master jumper, or do you have a few that you spot this way? My question was actually, do we have that data, particularly the one out on White Island? Will there be enough of a time frame, do you think, there with that data to feed into the coastal plan?
Well, it's a time-based thing. So they've only been in 3 weeks. So, that will be part of the DCC's plan. And obviously the data is available for us if we need it as well. And, we've been well linked in with the coastal team recently, doing lots of work, camera drops and things like that, and the NIWA stuff that we're doing as well. So we're linked in with that, but it's all part of that bigger coastal plan data process. So I think this will take some time to bed in, but it'll be another useful feed.
Gretchen?
Oh, sorry, it's not a Harbour Master question, so I should.
Was there any further Harbour Master questions? If not, welcome.
I was just, excuse me, going to be remiss not to ask for comment around the low flow work that's gone on over the summer. There's a note there that it's been great to see the great examples of community working together to avoid hitting that minimum flow mark as well. So just whether there's any lessons or particular findings from this season, or just it went pretty smoothly, but just an opportunity to comment on what has been quite a significant event in this region that we haven't really spoken about too much.
I guess just broadly in terms of the council's monitoring activities, I think they did go very well. I think it is something we're watching very closely, because particularly, with the new land and water plan, we will have more minimum flow sites and that workload potentially will increase. So we've put some reasonable effort into how we can automate those checks and try and minimise it used to take a lot longer for a staff member to sit there and click through a bunch of charts, and we now get one daily report that we flick through. So we put a lot of work into our efficiencies. And just broadly to note that those consent holders who do have the low flow conditions, we see very high levels of compliance. They're very good, and the interactions there are really good.
It's great to know. Yeah, brilliant to see those trends developing over time. It's really great. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Gretchen. Kate?
I think that on that point, just following through, so we're paragraphs 42 to 44, if anyone is following this. The understanding, the situation that happens often when low flows are getting to that point, there's a recalibration of flows, and just understanding how that is going forward might, I don't want to go backwards, how that will be working with those community groups that are doing it. I know there were some hiccups this year doing that, and just making sure that there's everyone's quite aware of what's happening. Is there a process that we can do better?
Yeah, we've had some discussions around that. I think the plan is heading into the next low flow season to write to our low flow consent holders just to explain what that process is and what that'll look like if the data changes, and also to be clear that our compliance approach is based on what people see at the time they make the decision. So if we're going and retrospectively changing data based on engaging, they're not going to have a retrospective compliance discussion saying, hey, the river was below. You know, we look at and we keep a copy of what the website showed at the time. So communicating with consent holders to make that clear. The gauging is a part of the process that occurs, and we will see examples where gauging will change in future years, but it's just being clear on our communication there.
Cool, thanks, Kate. Gary?
Thanks. Just on that, I think for a lot of consent holders, certainly in my area, this season was worst in 40 years. So from council's perspective, what gravity does that have in our systems in comparison to what might be normal years? I mean, are our systems well capable to manage to the extent in a very extreme season like this one? That's the first question.
Yeah, so there's probably two parts of an answer to that, and one I probably can't give because it's probably an answer for our environmental monitoring team in terms of their capacity and workload. We certainly managed okay in terms of our compliance monitoring this year, but we are very aware that many sites don't have low flow restrictions. And as more sites have that, if we go through a year like that, it's going to have more of an impact on our other monitoring because that's going to become the primary focus for a while.
Was there any enforcement action taken this year?
Yes, there was an abatement notice issued to one consent holder.
Okay. And it's across how many consents?
I don't have the count of consents. I think we said there was 110 consent holders who were affected by low flow restrictions. Some of them will have had more than one consent. I could get that count of consents for you, but consent holders is the stat we've used.
Yeah, but as the team said, we're really appreciative of the work that the consent holders put in terms of managing their water take and complying with any measures that were put in place, and also other ones that didn't have those limits on their consent. So some really good work from community water groups as well to help with the situation, reflecting the magnitude of what it was this season.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you. It's good to highlight that.
Thanks, Gary. I've got Kate and then Gretchen.
Look, thank you. And I had the pleasure of seeing a lot of that happening in my area and was really, really impressed. And that's in corporate companies doing a fantastic job, as well as Joe Rock Palmer. I think there was a really, really impressive job. What I don't know, and I'm really interested to know, and it may not be you guys that can answer this, but I'm wondering when we are going to get that information, is we have had an outstandingly low flow and dry year. What was the effect on the environment in those rivers?
Question, you're right, question of science, not for this. So Tom's just looking at preparing some information at the moment and different catchments that will speak to how they found it over the season and some of the data for some of our areas. And the one Gary just talked about, significant events in terms of one. I won't say the number because I'll get it wrong and he'll put it in the report, but there is some information being prepared at the moment along those lines.
And that will come to us?
I'll have to go away and confirm which committee.
Yeah,
it'll be policy and science, or I'll check and come back. They're preparing it at the moment.
Oh no, and that's great. I mean, I know that I've been talking to people who've seen creeks dry up for the first time ever. No one's without takes, so not they don't even flow, but they seriously haven't. And it's just understanding what is the environmental effect. It's just climate change, and it's not something for the future. It's something that's happening now, and understanding that, and whether we should have response teams. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Gretchen?
Yeah, that was my question as well. What do we do with this data? But it seems as though whenever we have a significant event, whether it's a drought or a flood, then we do collect that information post the event and report on it, which is good. And then, I guess, making sure that we're reporting significant trends, as Kate said as well, in the bigger picture of those events over time, I suppose. So just what is our council process for reporting, particularly here, low flow events, and making sure that it's, utilising the information as much as possible in terms of a technical and science setting, but it sounds as though that will happen. Thank you.
So if we take a question, given we're in question time, yes, you're absolutely right, Gretchen. The need for us to do more with our data, and bring it back to this table. So, I'll catch up with Tom and Anita and just work out the time frame for when that comes back, so that there can be a discussion on it. This committee still needs to receive the information to give reassurance that where there are legislative responsibilities in place in terms of consent holders, that we are fulfilling our responsibilities in that monitoring and enforcement capacity. And it's great that what we're hearing today is that very, very high compliance across the board, and very good voluntary compliance where there may not be associated consent limits, but they will obviously come in over time. So positive message there, but I agree with both Kate and Gretchen that the need for us to ensure we have a wrap up and review process, if you like, for a better term, that sort of summarises these issues, particularly where we have these types of summers that we've just come through, and talk a little bit about what the impacts might be and what our science team have observed.
Cool. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Gretchen. No further. Andrew?
I'm just up to my third. Is that okay? That's a generic question.
Because it's coming from you, Andrew, of course it is.
They usually take a while.
Land and water plan, and in relation to, particularly with a focus on right across the board from a regulatory perspective and compliance and monitoring, etc. And thinking about FMUs and looking at the data that's come through and the spread across the region where the issues have been, is there one particular FMU that stands out from the others in terms of compliance? And I'm not talking consenting, I'm talking sorry, but you want to answer it. No, sorry.
Are you giving out stars, Andrew?
No, I just thought it was interesting. We're going through this process at the moment, and there's been internal feedback through clause 3, and I was just thinking, well, has there been some sort of conclusions made by staff in the compliance space where we've got an area that is in area terms a repeat offender? Does that make sense?
Okay, I would have thought it was dependent on the particular issue.
Really difficult question to answer, because again, we don't want to winners and losers, and it depends on the activity and the location and the people within those areas. All we can show is the monitoring activities that we undertake and the locations of the consents within the Otago region. So I'm not going to put Tammy on the spot to say which region or which FMU is better or worse, and I don't think that would be appropriate to do so.
Can I help? How about I said if it was associated with forestry activities, for example, narrow it down. Is the data, obviously the data is available where the highest risk and if you look historically where there's been issues, I'm sure we would be able to say, well, for example, coastal Otago, where the majority of the forestry is probably where the majority of the issues are.
Well, that's pretty straightforward, yeah. And your point?
Look, I did review these maps that we've done, and it is a really great initiative from Simon's team to put the data down in terms of where are the locations of the audits in the sites. And we could do one if it was of interest in terms of all of the forestry inspections that we've done over the last 3 years and where they were located and what grading they were given.
Just to help the CE, I'm not being difficult, but what I'm what I'm trying to determine is that through the land and water plan process, each FMU may have particular, and obviously if you take water quality, it's better at the top end rather than at the coast, for example. But if you take individual rules for FMUs, the individual rules may vary depending on where the greatest risk is. You see where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
Maybe. So I'm not being difficult, Richard. What I'm trying to do is.
So I think the I'm trying to say this, there's a difference between the risk associated with activities that are occurring, as in consents that are issued and in compliance or non-compliance, and the risk associated with an activity because of the condition of the environment currently, and it's that that's driving the potential rules in the land and water plan. Once the activity commences, then we have a secondary assessment which takes into account the previous compliance history, you know, all of those things that go through that matrix to identify high risk sites. So I don't think it's a direct connection in that sense. Would be, I do understand what you're getting at, and that the outcome of the land and water plan in terms of the number of rules, and particularly if there is different consenting requirements, may drive different compliance needs in terms of the plan the team needs to put together. But I think the risk of non-compliance is a slightly different thing, and we would look at that slightly differently in terms of a risk matrix associated with an activity that might lead to non-compliance versus, is there a risk within that environment that requires us to put a different rule in the plan for a particular activity? If that, I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
Thank you.
And Andrew, it's interesting, figure 6, page 22, does separate consent inquiries on the basis of location. And maybe, maybe we could get a similar graph on the basis of,
I think
compliance.
Page 24 is probably the just in terms of broad.
Yeah.
I mean, that shows you the results of all of the audits undertaken.
Yeah.
And obviously, the more red and orange, then the more significant and moderate. And again, because we're risk based, because we don't have the resource to inspect everything, you might over time expect to see a little bit more red and orange because we're trying to find those sites where we think there's a greatest risk. And what I'd like to see over time is some trend data that shows that it's starting to get, more yellow and green as we deal with these higher risk activities. And that's something we can look at in terms of how are we collecting, how the same way we do trends for SOE monitoring, how are we doing it in compliance to show that we're making a difference in terms of the compliance we're seeing on the ground.
Yeah.
I suppose just to round it off, and I'll shut up, Brian. I suppose where I'm coming from is if you're going to ramp up rules and regulations, part of that process should be like problem identification. So that's what's floating around in the mind. It's just one tool of probably many that you would provide the policy planner writers. Here's some data, because we've had that data back to us, to this table, to show us bad practice, for example.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll leave it as that.
So, and before I go to Kate, I must say there are a lot of red and orange dots on page 24. So there's still some work to be done. A lot of work to be done. Yeah, Kate.
Well, only because we're getting down to maps 3 and 4. The one on monitoring, there are, I think, a number of sites which cannot be fully compliant by the nature of that maybe a telemetry that they can't do it at the point of take. For example, it has to be a wee bit further down because of the world isn't, it is probably full of satellites, but it wasn't when the monitoring equipment went up. And so that is maybe the level of non-compliance. I'm just wondering in those situations whether in order perhaps to show more green, and if something can't be fully compliant by the nature of those sort of technical non-compliances, whether that should be not yellow constantly because it can't literally improve. Whereas I think I'm right in thinking that's a non-compliant. Or are there many of those? Or when I see yellow, I think that's a technical thing, or is it something quite different?
So probably a two-part answer to that. Firstly, through the water meter regulations, there is a process for people to apply for what's called a water exemption. So if they can't meter at their point of take or can't install telemetry, they can gain a WEX, which gives them permission to do something else, and then they would be fully compliant. So we take that WEX into account when assessing. You're right, though, that generally those yellow are technical non-compliances. So you're either looking at someone who's exceeding their limits by just a bit and doesn't do it often. Something that's come in late is a very common reason for technical non-compliance, or there's a problem with it, but it's not considered to be environmentally significant. And often with consents, we'll ramp up through a process. So something, that appears for the first time might be yellow, and if it continues into a second year, it becomes an orange, and if it continues into a third year, it becomes a red.
Okay.
And obviously through that time, we're trying to address it, and we're telling people what's wrong, and most of the time we see it corrected.
Okay, and if it can't be corrected,
I don't think there's many things out there that can't be corrected. We do certainly see some examples where it's difficult, and then it would stay the yellow, depending on the environmental effect. But specifically around telemetry, there is a process through the regs. It does involve an annual application. That's the way the regs were constructed. And also specifically on that, we're looking forward with interest to the One New Zealand Starlink discussions, where they're supposed to be introducing Wi-Fi connectivity across the country, which should remove some of those problems.
So, that's more scary, because what you're telling me then is that if the satellite conditions change, and I think you need to get this messaging out actually quite urgently, this is what I think you're saying, because at the moment, as 2G and 3G are taken off, people are putting in new equipment. And there's a year-long program for that. If you're then saying that if your current site can be, if you should be at the point of take, for example, and you need to invest in that, we need to message that clearly, because that would be terrible to be a non-compliant, that you invest in something that's going to be non-compliant in the following year.
Yeah.
That's
certainly, I can certainly go and look at that. And the reality, the way the government's constructed the water meter regulations is that if you can't install telemetry and you're supposed to, you need to reapply every year anyway. And I think we're requiring every 3 years that the provider reconfirms that you can't install telemetry. But that's a national regulation. That's not an IRC one.
Thank you for that update.
Thanks, Kate. Michael, welcome.
Thank you. Can I take you to paragraph 27, please? From experience elsewhere, it's my experience in local government, the more you audit something, the more you find something. So if I go to paragraph 27, over the last financial year, you did 145% of your planned compliance audits or field inspections, which on the face of it sounds a phenomenal productivity gain. Is that what I'm reading here?
Yeah, so what that 145% is based on how many planned inspections that we had. So about 45% more inspections than we had planned according to our operational schedule.
Why did you do an extra 45%? Did you have more staff? Or did you just find that you underestimated the number of audits you should be doing in a financial year?
So there's a range of factors there. So some of that's related to we've now got our staff at full capacity in terms of training and those sorts of things. So that's a part of it. The other factor is that we have streamlined our kind of planning processes for audits, so that we are project oriented around geographic location. So it might be that you hit 3 or 4 audits or inspections for the same site, depending on how many consents that particular location holds. So there's a range of factors there.
Well, then what I'm hearing is that you probably need to adjust your schedule, do you? Because you haven't had a productivity gain, you just seem to have reinterpreted the way you do stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, so through the chair, so earlier I explained that for our monitoring schedule for the next financial year, that's based on the same data as this current financial year, and the reason we haven't increased haven't proposed an increase in the number of inspections is in relation to some of the projects upcoming for the staff that they will be involved in the update of our regulatory data system, and also regulatory changes as they are embedded in the next financial year.
So I don't understand what you've just said. Are you going to be using the 145% increase, or the number that you've got over the last financial year, as your base for the next 12 months, or will it drop back to the 100% of the 23-24 financial year?
100%.
It's 100%.
So you're not going to do as much audit inspection in the coming financial year?
Not as our target for the team in the work program.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Kevin.
With that comment in mind, does that give us, and I suppose what work are we doing on, does that give us the optimum inspection or compliance monitoring level to ensure that we are getting, that we're seeing the right environmental effects and that things are being complied with correctly? You're comfortable at that level?
Yes.
Cool, thank you.
Just a bit, Ed, so the compliance program speaks to the 3-year compliance. I can't remember the name of it, but there's a 3-year plan that's signed off and then reviewed, and then obviously we put in an annual program just because it's part of the work planning, and that speaks directly to the priorities that have been signed off as part of that overall 3-year plan. It's great that the team have managed significantly higher than what was scheduled this year, and that, as Tammy said, can be due to any number of things. And we have had a more settled year in compliance probably than any year I've been here, just in terms of successful recruitment, embedding some process changes, and looking at some of these activities where we do generate more inspections. But I think, to Joe's point around it is only forecast at 100% next year, because we have got things like the program that Simon was talking about in response to Kate's question, the upgrade to Iris. There's a number of things that impact how productive, if you like, or how much time the staff can spend out on site. I think, it'd be great if we can deliver higher than scheduled again, because it does mean we're getting out and we're seeing more, and ultimately the more staff can be out in the field interacting with people, the better. So that's just part of the monitoring that you'll get quarterly as 24-24 rolls out.
Gary.
Just one quick comment. Just map 4 is quite compelling when you look at the numbers. When you look at full compliance at 3,500, you add in the low risk non-compliance, so you're up above sort of 5,400, and then we're looking at 107 significant non-compliances and 274 moderate non-compliances. So as an overall comment, given this is a snapshot to the 30th of April for our consents, that would have to be pretty good going. Would that be a fair comment if you were giving it a score on a report card? Would you say that?
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment, Councillor, and I'd probably direct you to figure 8 as well, which is the year-on-year percentages of those grades, and shows a drop in the number of significant non-compliances. It is worth noting that with performance monitoring, sometimes it's a one-off, annual review of your water use, but it might be one of your 12 water samples, or it might be sending in a management plan. So there are many of those that would have to be pretty bad before they reach that significant non-compliance level. What we're trying to do with performance monitoring is help the compliance team target where their high-risk areas are for audit, because it's showing these are the ones that have problems with the things they're supposed to do. So you'd expect a higher percentage of significant non-compliance at audit, because we're trying to target those. Performance monitoring, we're trying to do as much as we can to assess everything that people are sending us. But I would agree with that statement. We're not seeing a lot of significant non-compliance.
Right. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Gary. Joe, be remiss not to comment on the DEM permit processing. You've got one outstanding, some really good work been going on there. Any comments?
Yeah, just excellent work from the team internally, but also from the applicants and the consultants externally that we've been working with to process those consents, and also our stakeholders and partners as well on that process. So there is one application remaining. It is still in the system, just working through a few issues relating to other things, not necessarily to take a use permit, but relating to wetlands and other things. So one left, but just really grateful that we are at the point that we are with those DEM permits, and that really is seeing Plan Change 7 in action in terms of how that has helped our processing.
Cool, thank you. Well done. I'm going to move now to the recommendations. Two recommendations. The first one to note report, the second one to approve.
Happy to move both.
The monitoring schedule. So Kevin's happy to move. Do we have a seconder? Do we have any debate around, so Elliot is seconded, do we have any debate around that, or are we quite happy for the motion to be put? No debate? Sorry, Kevin.
I just want to speak to it.
You want to speak to it?
That's okay. Look, I just want to put a point on cost of compliance. Mike, that a mate of mine called Mike reminded me about. Talking 2G, 3G, 4G, with now all systems going to 4G, all consent holders that currently have to send their data into Mr. Wilson to make sure everything's up to scratch are now faced with the unenviable task of reconfiguring their systems to go from 3G to 4G. So a simple 5 litre a second take to change that gear over would be a minimum of $1,500 to redo that system. Now that is providing that your provider is actually willing to continue to go from 3G to 4G. There are people in the market that I've been informed today that are actually going out of that market and will not no longer be able to supply. So there is a very good system, but there is significant cost being placed upon the users, and these are costs completely out of their control. So this 3G to 4G is going to be quite significant to happen. So I would say it's a minimum of $1,500. That's from a quote to get that done. So other than that, very good report, and appreciate all the dots, and appreciate the work that staff goes in quarterly to send this to us. So very much appreciated. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, Gary, usually have a final word.
Sorry, I have to add to that, because $1,500 is very light if you can go from 3 to 4. For a lot of that technology, it was put in by providers who were sort of, being typical Kiwis. They were looking at what was out there, and when you go to upgrade it or replace it, you find that there's no support for it. It can't be upgraded, and you have to go to a whole new system. And the quotes for those are sort of $7,000, $10,000, $15,000. So as we keep moving along with technology, there will be massive cost on these people. That was all. Thank you.
Cool, thanks, Gary. Before I put the motion, I'd just like to make the comment to staff. Thank you for the calibre of your interactions and the transparency. The whole regulatory scene is not straightforward. So, Joe, Richard, staff, a big thank you. Keep it up.
I had a question from before the motion was put.
Okay, apologies.
And I'll ask it now. Not sure if it fits in with the discussion. And I'm sure in my interest register, I have chair of the Peninsula Biodiversity Trust, and in fact, I'm a trustee of Predator Free Dunedin in there. And my question is around the regional pest management plan and where reporting on that happens, because I'm aware we have an issue on the peninsula with regard to issue?
So the reporting on pest management goes to the Environmental Implementation Committee.
Okay.
So that is, oh, actually, tomorrow afternoon, we've got a continuation and there's papers in there on the pest management plan and operational plan.
That is my question. Thanks.
Thanks, Melanie. Okay, I'm going to put the motion. Those two recommendations. We've got a mover, Kevin, a seconder, Elliot. Those for? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. I'll close today's meeting of the Regulatory Committee. We'll do a closing karakia at the end of the day. Yep. Thank you very much.